From the Homestead Studios in Santa Clarita, California, this is a Headache Soul production. Welcome to Just the Tip-Sters, America's favorite true crime podcast. I'm your host, Melissa Morgan. And my beloved Tipsters, this is going to be one weird-ass Murdertizer because it's got a lot to cover. Not so much a lot of different details, but a lot of information about one interesting case that I think you'll find interesting too. First thing I want to say is thank you to the United Arab Emirates for putting us on the charts again. I don't understand it, but I am grateful. I guess because I have enough trouble speaking English, it just is amazing to me that, you know, I'm on the charts in the UAE, but thank you for listening, you beautiful tipsters. I wanted to say thank you to tipster Jared for his suggestion of bee pollen for me complaining about my crappy allergies, and I am desperately in need of more D, Claritin D. So please don't send me pictures of your penises. That would make me not be happy with my allergies with pictures of your... Yeah, anyway, but Claritin D, hey, if you happen to have, you know, some sort of info on that, I'd be just really grateful. I also want to say thank you to tipster Kyla for her kindness. She also lost her husband and a while ago, and she recommended an author and a book. And the author is Michelle Steinke Baumgardt. She is remarried, and she said she's unwilling to give up her widow card, which I think is a beautiful thing. A lot of people apparently were upset with her when she got remarried and said she can't call herself a widow. And she said, yeah, I can. I am, you know, Mitchell's widow, and I am Kevin's wife. And I think that's beautiful. That's a beautiful way to honor, you know, a relationship you had, children you had together. I'm really looking forward to reading her book called Healthy Healing. I'm really looking forward to that. So, you know, not to be talking about death the entire time, I promise. I did want to mention that I attended a memorial, the first time ever, a Jewish service. I've been to several Jewish weddings. I have never been to a Jewish memorial or funeral, and it was really lovely. It's very short and to the point. And the rabbi was funny and personable and lovely. And he said his favorite quote from, I guess, from the Torah. And it's also, you know, in the Bible, it's Proverbs. And it's in the Talmudic version, it's the soul of man is the candle of God. And I really like that one. I like that. It's just semantics, but I think that's incredibly beautiful. And I don't give a shit what your religious beliefs are, or if you have no religious beliefs, that's up to you. The same way you shouldn't give a shit about my religious beliefs. In the Christian Bible, I guess it's like the spirit of man is the lamp of God. I just really like the soul of man is the candle of God. Maybe I'm more old school, but I think that's incredibly beautiful. And Stephen was Mark's best friend's brother. Mark's best friend, Andrew Lorand, who was incredibly good to me after Mark passed, read one of the eulogies at his celebration of life, is, you know, has been a decades-long friend for Mark, 30 years or more. There was no way I wouldn't be at his brother's service. His brother passed away suddenly, tragically, and in the Jewish faith, you must bury your loved one within 3 days. On a Tuesday, Stephen Lorand was walking from his car to his apartment with this brand new computer, this brand new laptop under his arm that he had gotten to communicate more efficiently with his nephews back east and his brother and his sister-in-law, Sharon, and with Zoom calls. And a person didn't see him for whatever reason and hit him in the crosswalk, and he did not survive. And some people have said, how could you go to a funeral? And I was like, well, how could I not? I mean, because I've lost my husband doesn't mean I'll never go to another memorial or funeral. I would want to be there for anyone who extends an invitation to honor someone in their life that they love. That because I've lost my husband does not mean that I can't be there for others. I don't understand that. So this is an incredibly weird Murdertizer because it wasn't under the auspices of murder, but it's a very odd story. And I have to say up front that May is National Mental Health Awareness Month. And I'm not really one to talk about my own mental health because honestly, who the fuck cares? That's not what you're here for. And that's not what I'm here for. I don't talk about my mental health that often. You can probably figure out where my mental health is if you listen closely. But I really don't like podcasts with hosts that just talk all about their shit as if anyone really cares. You know, I mean, I talk a little bit at the beginning of the podcast about maybe what's going on in my life or maybe about cases, but honestly, that's not what you're here for. This is not the Melissa show. This is just the Tip-Sters. And you Tip-Sters have taken this podcast to something bigger and better than I could have ever dreamed of. You know, what started as a 12-year-old boy dick joke turned into a real viable podcast with people calling in, emailing tips to law enforcement. And I could not be more grateful to you listeners because you turned this into something so much more than I could have ever even imagined. Your imagination, your generosity, your brilliant minds are so much more than I ever thought this podcast could ever be. And I really don't like when podcast hosts talk about how they feel because I don't care. If you have been a longtime listener of this podcast, you understand that I am a big crier. And I would cry reading people's stories because they touched me. And they were worth crying about, you know? Sometimes the terrible things that happen to people, that people do to other people, it's worth crying about. And I would get very angry at Mark Humphreys and tell him to edit it out. I'd be like, cut it out. Just cut it out right now. And he did for a while. And he got to the point where he was like, no, I won't do it anymore. And I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean you won't? It's completely unprofessional. I want you to cut it out. And he said, no, it's authentic. It's authentic and it makes you who you are. Mark and I will have to agree to disagree into the next life because I don't like this. But you don't have to worry about me. I had a very sweet listener say, hey, have you ever thought about, counseling? Yeah. Like a week after Mark died, I was incredibly blessed to be given the name of a grief counselor. And I thought I would be interviewing quite a few because how do you find one so immediately in your first, session with someone? Because it just doesn't happen like that. But I am incredibly blessed. And for the better part of 7 months, it's been 7 months now since Mark passed, I have been working every week with this incredible woman, Karen. And she helps me reframe things. She helps me see things that I see in only one way. And she is, besides my amazing friends, she is one of the reasons I'm still standing. And doing this podcast is another reason why I'm still here. I am floundering with this podcast so much more than I thought I would be after 7 months. But, I'm working on it. I know you can understand that I'm working on it, but I knew I could not get through the loss of Mark by myself. I knew I couldn't, no matter how amazing my friends are. And they are really amazing. But, sometimes you need someone who isn't just a friend. You need, someone with, nothing invested, an outside perspective, someone who, I don't know, might be trained and this is their career. It's more than a job. It is a calling for them. And you need someone like that. Or let me just say, I needed someone like that. You may not. But, people have said it's very courageous to ask for help. I didn't feel especially courageous, but I knew I needed to get into therapy of some kind. And I had tried to find some group counseling up here in Santa Clarita, but I will be honest, not a lot of options. So, to me, therapy has been, honestly, and I don't want to sound, too dramatic, but it's been life-saving. It's been life-saving. It really, really has been. And if you feel like you need someone to talk to, I hope that you have the time and the means to find that. I know that even if you don't have insurance that covers it, there are other ways and other means to get someone to talk to. I do know that. If you feel like you don't know how to find that, I hope you'll email me or call the Tip-Sters hotline, which I will give you the information for at the end. And I just want to say again, this is, May is National Mental Health Awareness Month. And I also want to say that the National Suicide Prevention Hotline number is 1-800-273-8255. With the recent passing of Naomi Judd, I just think it's important to bring this up because this Murdertizer is also going to be about an extremely odd case that I feel so ignorant about, so completely ignorant. But this episode is dedicated to my friend Anthony, who sent me a meme that was supposed to be funny, and it was a text exchange between a couple, like a screenshot of a text. And one person says, "Can I call you tonight?" And the responder says, "Does Al Greene get nervous around grits?" And I was like, I don't get it. I don't understand, Anthony. So instead of just like passing it off, I was like, I don't understand, Anthony. Does Mr. Greene have like a gluten sensitivity? Or why would grits make him nervous? I don't understand. And he's like, hot grits on your skin. And I'm like, no, I don't know what you mean. I don't know. So here's what that meme meant. And Anthony, who is decades younger than me, knows the story. And I feel goofy as shit that I do not know the story because who doesn't love Al Greene? I mean, come on. So apparently there were two, just like the voice of many generations. Let's also be honest. The voice of many generations. Al Greene is so unique and like such a weaved into the fabric of our lives with his, that sounds like cotton. He's much more than cotton. He's spandex, really great stretchy stuff that makes like your jeans feel better. Yeah, Al Greene is a magical material that is, so gifted. And I will tell you, as a young person, I did wonder why we went from calling him Al Greene to calling him the Reverend Al Greene. And I did not understand. And apparently there were two instances in his life, one of them being, in a smaller way apparently, a concert in my hometown in Cincinnati that helped propel him. He said, well, this was a fall off of the stage. And he said, the fall was God's way of saying I had to hurry up. I wasn't moving fast enough for God. I wasn't moving toward him fast enough. So that's the second thing that made an impression in his life to become a minister. He has his own congregation at a tabernacle in Memphis, Tennessee. But I feel like that was his home. I feel like the original incident that propelled him to move toward God was one that would be life-changing, and it comes back to this being Mental Health Awareness Month. So if you don't know this story, and I did not, and I am embarrassed that I did not, I want you to listen to the story from Al Greene's own words. This is from his biography that came out after, that's called Take Me to the River. So the story of Al Greene and Mary Woodson is, let's just call it messy. I mean, that's the nicest way, I guess I can, say. But it's interesting. There's so much information on this. Again, this is why I feel ridiculous. there's so much information on what happened to him and to Ms. Woodson, but I feel like his own words are a beautiful description of what happened. And I know we're getting one side, but I just feel like this is better than reading. And you can find lots of journalistic impressions of this, but there are some articles that try to make light of what happened. One is called A Real Hot Mess, How Grits Got Weaponized Against Cheating Men. And the thing is, he wasn't cheating. This is a difficult story, but yeah, So let's just go back to October 18th of 1974, when a girlfriend of Al Greene's, who he had met when he was performing for inmates at the New York State Correctional Facility, she was visiting someone, and he was doing a series of prison concerts. And he was very taken with her. I mean, this is the man who recorded, I'm tired of being alone and let's stay together. I'm still in love with you. I mean, he's sort of magical, and his voice is kind of amazing. And, this is one of those things that's, a difficult story. Also, Al Greene talks about himself in third person. So that's a little odd to me. So Al Greene says, it was one of the prison concerts for inmates at the New York State Correctional Facility that I first met Mary Woodson. She was the kind of woman that when you saw her, you'd take a look, and then a second, and then a third, and then, after a while, your eyes would just become accustomed to turning her way. Mary had a classy way of carrying herself, statuesque and graceful and proud. She was there visiting a friend, she told me, although she never did say what her friend had done to land in prison. But Mary had a lot of secrets. I casually asked Mary where she was heading after the concert, but Mary didn't fall under my spell quite so quickly. She begged off my invitation to come back with me to my hotel. It was late, she said. She had to get up early. It was probably best that she just go home and get into bed. So I offered her a ride in my limo into the city, and on the trip back, we just talked. I wasn't pushing anything. She was pretty, and I like having pretty women around me. As I spent more and more time out on the road, I had begun to accumulate a certain type of girlfriend from one town to the next. It wasn't a romantic or even a physical thing, just a way to satisfy the fascination I've always had for beautiful women. I'd come into town, give them a call, and they were always available to drop by and spend a little time. But Mary had things on her mind. Just to impress her after that first night, I invited her to fly out to San Francisco with me for another concert. Now, nothing had gone on between us yet, but I figured with all that free transportation, the coming and going, when we finally did get down to business, it was going to be something special. In the meantime, I liked being around her. She was a real woman, not like the giggling girls who flocked around me on the road, and everything about her was new and exciting. But there was something else that I had never experienced before. Her moody times and the way she stared off into the distance like she was listening to someone else from very far away. But to me, that just added to the mystery. After San Francisco, I went back home to Memphis. It wasn't more than a few days when I got the call. She was in town. Maybe we could get together? By this time, I was used to women turning up on my doorstep, but Mary played it cool, and it was the way she held herself back that made me want to reach around her calm and collected manner to touch the cold flame that burned at her core. It was an infatuation that blinded me to all the warning signs. When I finally got around to asking her about her past, we'd gone so far down the path of our own destruction, I don't think she had any choice but to lie. No, she said she'd never been married, and of course she didn't have any kids. The truth was, Mary had left behind a whole family in New Jersey to come and be with me, but I would only find that out later. All I knew then, as the days we spent together turned to weeks, was that I wanted her around, right next to me. It wasn't just her beauty and bearing that drew me to her. She had a way of looking me straight in the eye and telling me things about myself that still send shivers down my spine. The first time it happened was on a beautiful spring day in the park where we'd gone for a picnic. "You know something," she said with a sparkle in her eye. "You're going to be a magnificent star one day." I just laughed. As far as most people were concerned, I was already a star. No, she said. "That's not what I mean. You're going to stand in front of great congregations, and you're going to preach wonderful sermons that will turn the hearts of many." "Me? Preach?" I laughed again. "All the preaching I do is a little love and happiness." I had made a joke about it. But I was starting to get a little nervous. She stared like she was looking right through me and gave me a dreamy smile and turned away. When she looked back, she had tears in her eyes. "When you do that, when you preach in your church, will you save a seat for me up front?" Then things started to go wrong for Mary, although I didn't know it at the time. Her husband had come from New Jersey to bring her back. She'd flat out refused, but he wasn't going to let her go and made it clear that she belonged to him and to her children. Sooner or later, her time was going to run out. The night it finally did, I was in the studio. At 6 that evening, they put a call through. It was the Memphis sheriff. "We arrested a young woman at the Peabody Hotel for smoking pot. She says she's a friend of yours." I knew immediately it was Mary. Not that she was a big drug user. It's just when you have that feeling that something is going to go wrong and you have it for long enough, you always seem to know the details before they happen. When Mary was escorted out of the holding cell, I could see straight away the humiliation of being arrested had taken its toll. She was pale and trembling, and she hardly said a word to me, not even looking in my direction. I wanted to make her feel better. "Come back to the studio with me," I said to her. "I'll write you a song." And she looked at me for the first time up through her long lashes like a little girl, and it made me want to put my arms around her and protect her. When we arrived at the studio, I was nervous and upset, so I ended up just riffing on sha-la-la-la-la, hoping the refrain would calm her down. And it did, or at least it seemed to. But the mood I'd worked so hard to create was shattered a moment later when the door opened and a good-looking woman rushed in to give me a big hug. It was Carlotta Williams, an airline stewardess I'd met on my travels. Having a party wasn't exactly at the top of my list. I was too concerned about Mary's fragile state of mind, but Carlotta seemed so happy to see me that I couldn't just turn her away. It was getting late, and the day's hectic events had started to catch up with me. I closed down the session and suggested that Mary and Carlotta come back to the house where we could relax. I made sure they understand I had lots of spare bedrooms where they could spend the night. The last thing on my mind was some kind of kinky encounter. The three of us piled into the rolls I had just bought a few months before, and somehow Carlotta ended up sitting in the front with me while Mary was in the back. All the way home, I kept glancing at her through the rearview mirror, disturbed by the strange expression she had on her face, as if she'd made up her mind about something, once and for all. Once she caught me looking at her and fixed me with a cold, appraising stare that set my nerves on edge. I turned away quickly, keeping my attention on the winding road leading through the thick forest back to my house. Everything was quiet when we finally arrived, and as I pulled up to the house, one of my bodyguards let us in. After we got through the front door, the rest of the security staff shut everything up and double-checked the grounds. It was the lockdown routine that they had to make sure I was safe. But that night was different. It was as if being in the house itself was risky. Carlotta must have sensed that something wasn't right because she asked to be shown to her room right away, saying that she had an early flight the next morning. I showed her upstairs to a guest bedroom down the hall from my suite. After I made sure she was comfortable, I went back downstairs, still worried about Mary. I walked into the living room, but she wasn't there. I called her name and heard a soft answer from the kitchen. Mary was standing at the stove when I came in, absent-mindedly stirring a big pot of water with a wooden spoon. She turned when she heard my footsteps and smiled, a wistful, sad smile. "Al, honey, have you ever thought of getting married?" she asked. "Married?" I said dumbly. "Maybe we should talk about this in the morning, baby." She turned back to stirring the pot without a word. A long moment passed until, just to break the tension, I asked, "What are you cooking?" I was worried and a little frightened, trying desperately to break through, make contact, and bring her back into the real world. She didn't answer my question, didn't even acknowledge that I was there for what seemed like the longest time. Then suddenly she was in my arms, kissing my neck and hanging on like it was our last night on earth. "You know, Al," she whispered in my ear, "I would never do anything to hurt you." The words sent another chill up my spine. "Hurt me?" I repeated, searching her eyes and trying to understand what was going on in their deep brown depths. It was all distance and darkness, and I guess she must have seen the confusion on my face, because she kissed me again and told me everything was fine. I left her there, still stirring that simmering pot of water, and went upstairs to take a shower. Peeling off my clothes down to my underwear, I went into the bathroom. As I stood in front of the mirror brushing my teeth, I suddenly heard a sound behind me, outside the door, in the bedroom. I turned around, but I couldn't see anything, so I went on brushing. I was bending down to rinse. I heard another sound. This time it was the door to the bathroom opening slowly. I looked up just in time to see Mary's reflection in the mirror, and she had a steaming pot in both hands. In the next second, my world exploded into 1,000 splatters of pure agony. Mary had added grits to the water, making a thick, boiling hot paste. With all her strength, she hurled it at me, splashing the bathroom walls and scorching my naked back. The pain was so intense that I wasn't sure what was happening for a moment before I started screaming. What happened next was a red-washed blur as I squirmed and thrashed in searing anguish, trying somehow to get away from her and from the horrible burning on my back. I staggered into the bedroom and out into the hall, where Carlotta had just opened the door. "What in the world?" she started to say, but I pushed right past her and ran into her bathroom. Everything was spinning, revolving around the unbearable pain running down my back like raking fingers. I slumped over on the floor, rested my head for a moment against the cool porcelain of the bathtub. Carlotta burst in. "Al," she screamed, "what's wrong?" It was then she saw the egg-sized blisters rising on my burned flesh. She staggered backward, and I thought she was going to pass out. But instead, she grabbed my arm and pulled me up. "Come on," she said, "get in the tub." I climbed in, and she turned on the shower full blast and freezing cold. I don't know what was worse, the pain of my back or that icy torrent. I screamed again and bent over and started to black out when I suddenly heard, over the thundering spray of the shower, the sound of a loud bang. I looked at Carlotta and she looked at me. It was as if we both knew something terrible was unfolding around us, and all we could do was stand in horrible, helpless witness. Then another bang and the sickening, unmistakable sound of something hitting the floor. I heard my own disembodied voice again, and to this day I don't know whether I spoke the words or just caught them in my head. "The woman has killed herself." I jumped out of the shower as Carlotta tried to hold me back. "Where are you going?" she shouted. "Didn't you hear those shots?" I screamed back and ran out of the bathroom and down the hall, my back throbbing and the blisters beginning to ooze and bleed. As I got to my bedroom, I began to slow down, suddenly realizing that I had no idea what might be waiting for me beyond the door. I peered inside, and through the open door I could still see the grits dripping down the bathroom walls, and there was no sign of Mary. So I went into the next bedroom. Still no one. I made my way down the hall slowly and carefully until I got to the last bedroom. There on the floor was the lifeless shape of Mary. Carlotta came up behind me and I could hear her whisper, "Oh my God." But in that split second, all I saw was the gun in Mary's hand. I could hear my security guards pounding down the hall behind me, and I summoned all my courage and knelt down by Mary's side. There was no sign of blood. I put my fingers to her neck, feeling for a pulse, nothing. I grabbed her wrist, it was limp. Then it was as if the earth opened up and swallowed me into darkness. Mary was dead. When the darkness parted, I was in the hospital in a whole new kind of nightmare. The pain of those third-degree burns on my back made every moment torture, but what was worse was the constant interrogation by the police. One set of cops would come in and ask me to tell them what happened down to the smallest detail. I'd try to put my recollections together as best I could, even though it all seemed so unreal, as if it had happened to someone else entirely. And then they'd leave and a whole new set of cops would arrive and start the process all over. I could tell by the looks they traded that they were trying to decide whether I was telling the truth. There were lots of questions about the 2 shots that had been fired, and I didn't really have an answer. Although I've since heard it said that suicides sometimes shoot off a round to see if the gun works before turning it on themselves. Your guess is as good as mine, and while I never did find out exactly what the police thought was going on that night, I was only too happy to oblige when they asked me to take a lie detector test. I wanted more than anything to be left alone to try to pick up the pieces of my life. Well, I passed the polygraph test, and everything I said was backed up by Carlotta and my bodyguards. Eventually, the voices of the police faded and were replaced by the clatter of steel surgical instruments as they cut away the dead skin from my back and began the slow, arduous process of skin grafts. I would spend the next 8 months in convalescence, and like most calamities, that was a bit of a blessing in disguise. I was finally left alone to rest, to knit back together the tatters of my life, and to try to find the answers to questions that so many people would ask in years to come. Why had Mary killed herself? Why had she tried to destroy me? To this day, I can't say I really know. There are whole parts of her life that she never let me into. While I'm never going to be able to fully explain the events of that terrible night to everyone's satisfaction, I know firsthand that the famous thin line between love and hate is real, and for some people, what they can't have, they have to destroy. Of course, those answers were never good enough for some. For years afterward, rumors and whispered gossip swirled around me, and while I guess I can understand the interest in scandals and celebrity, I can't say it didn't hurt to hear the lies that people told. Some say I'd murdered Mary, others that my bodyguards had shot her dead. It was also spread around that my religious conversion had come from almost getting scalded to death that night, about being caught up in such a disgraceful mess that I had to do something to redeem my image. Of course, no one paid the slightest attention to the fact that I'd been born again almost a year before and had been preaching from the stage ever since. But that's the way things go when you're a public figure. The spotlight feels great until it starts to cook you like you're a bug under a magnifying glass. 2 years later, in 1976, I bought the Full Gospel Tabernacle Church in Memphis, and he still preaches there today. This is an interesting thing that he mentions a small section in the book, Take Me to the River. He says he was born again in Disneyland. At their best, the songs I wrote and the music I sang were expressions of what I was feeling at the moment they arrived. In 1972, I was in what you might call an expectant mood. After a trip to the top that pretty much took my breath away and more than I could imagine the kind of success that was supposed to matter, I was already beginning to ask a question that has come to haunt more than one rich, famous, happy celebrity. Is this all there is? Although I hadn't put it to myself in those words, the uneasy feeling that followed me around like a hungry dog was getting harder to ignore. Jesus was waiting for the right time to make his move. And then finally, in the summer of 1973, in the middle of a nonstop tour to promote Call Me, at that point I was booked up with solid shows. As a result, my life was suddenly no longer mine. Everywhere I turned, there were people dependent on me. I wasn't just a singer, a songwriter, or even a star. I was an enterprise. We came to the crossroads in the summer, in a hotel room with the Matterhorn rising up outside the window. I wasn't in Switzerland. It was Disneyland, and the spotlights that lit the fake snow on the ride shone in my room with a pale, ghostly light. I couldn't have been asleep more than an hour or two when I was suddenly awakened by the sound of shouting. I sat bolt right up in bed, frightened that some crazy fan had broken into the room. The shouting continued, and as I listened, I realized that the voice wasn't threatening so much as excited and happy, as if someone had just walked into a surprise party. And then I realized the voice was my own. I was praising God, rejoicing in the great and glorious gift of salvation. Although I knew that if I kept up that hollering for much longer, I was sure to get arrested, or worse. There was nothing in either earthly or spiritual realms that could have shut my mouth. Suddenly I heard a voice, calm and clear, coming from inside me, but rattling the walls like an earthquake. Are you ashamed of me? The words pierced me like a knife. I ran into the bathroom. The part of my mind that was still tethered to the world was starting to panic. If I didn't shut myself up soon, there was going to be an embarrassing scene. And then how would I explain this to the police? I couldn't think of anything to do but grab an armful of towels and bury my face in them. I remember biting the cotton nap, trying to muffle myself when I suddenly heard that voice again asking one more time, "Are you ashamed of me?" "Lord, no." I shouted into the towels and threw them off. "No," I screamed again as I heard a pounding from the door connecting Laura's room to my own. Laura Lee was a backup singer and a companion and lover of Al Greene's. "Al," she said, "what's happening to you? Should I call the doctor?" I grabbed her and dragged her with me into the hallway. A little way down the corridor, another door opened, and I could see Haywood Anderson, my chief of security, rush into the hall, ready to take on whoever was assaulting his boss. But no one could have overcome my attacker that night. It took me the rest of the morning to come back to myself, weeping and praying and holding on to my friends and family, like a lost child found safe again. We all sang songs. I remembered the old gospel gems I'd grown up with, and one by one those around me offered up their thanksgiving for so great a salvation of so great a sinner. And when dawn finally broke over the Disneyland Matterhorn, the freeway began to fill up with morning traffic, and all along the boulevard, the shops and stores and little souvenir stands that sold Mickey Mouse watches and hats with goofy ears opened up, and I passed into a deep and untroubled sleep. My head was cradled in Laura's arms, my dad held my hand, and my Savior dwelt within me. So that happened before Mary Woodson, and then later on in 1976 in Cincinnati, he took a 12-foot fall from the stage, and he was like, "Well, that's it. I'm going to buy this Tabernacle Church, and I am going to become a minister." And that is a pretty interesting story. I will tell you that Al Greene is a hotbed of true crime. More than once, something has touched his life other than the suicide of Mary Woodson. But I can tell you it's a lot. A distant family member was murdered by her boyfriend, who is serving 50 to 100 years. So I think he'll be taken care of. And the part of his story that is really interesting to me is that his sister, Maxine Greene, went missing in the fall of 2013 from Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's a large family. They were born in Arkansas and moved when Al was quite young to Grand Rapids, Michigan. So his sister, Maxine Greene, in 2013, two different dates of her disappearance. One is from the family, which they believe she was spotted. The last time she was spotted was September 6th through September 8th. Her guardian reported her missing August 23rd of 2013. So when I say her guardian, Maxine was schizophrenic and she had an alcohol addiction. She was living in an adult living home in Grand Rapids, and she walked away from the home. And her family knows that there was reported sightings at the B&B party shops on Leonard Street Northwest in Grand Rapids. And she was on disability, and she was reported missing when she didn't show up to pick up her disability payment. She was, in her 60s. She was distinct looking, 5'10", 142 pounds. She was a beautiful, tall, thin woman. There's a $2,500 reward from Crime Stoppers being offered for any information on Maxine. The best information I have seen is put up by her niece on Facebook. It's a Facebook page entitled Missing Maxine Greene. And the family is just looking for answers. And they have tried so hard. I mean, she's been gone for almost 9 years now. Not a trace of her. She could be living on the streets. She could be, living in a shelter. But they would like to know. They would like to know where she is. They would like to offer her help if she's still alive. It seems really odd that they just feel like they're not getting the kind of help they need from the Grand Rapids Police Department. So if you have any information on Maxine Greene, the Grand Rapids Police Department number is 616-456-3400. The Crime Stoppers number, where the reward is being offered from the area, is 866-774-2345. I want to say once again, the National Suicide Prevention Hotline is 1-800-273-8355. And if you have any tips on a missing person, an unsolved homicide, you just want to suggest a case, please give us a call at 832-TIPSTER. That's 832-847-7837. You can email us at jttipsters@gmail.com. You can find us on any social media platform, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We have our new website, which is justthetipsters.com. And I couldn't be more grateful for you, tipsters, and more cowbell.